Okay, we're live.
Great. Done. Thank you. So, helping us seems like a major problem is psychological manipulation.
Good morning, Senator Sears. For the record, Ben Nobrowski from the Office of Legislative Counsel. Yes, to your point, it does seem like psychologically manipulative tactics have been a point of debate for the committee and the witnesses. I do kind of have a inventory in no particular order of things that I've kind of starred that were potential issues. If you'd like me to go through them for the committee, or
that might be helpful starting point.
Okay, so what I have, and again, in no particular order of importance, is that the mental element in the definition of deception of knowingly or of knowing is a potential point of discussion, either what it should be, if it should be a higher level of mental state, or if it should be repeated throughout for the various clauses mentioned. So for instance, deception includes the knowing communication of false facts and just repeating knowing before misrepresenting the accuracy of the facts, and so on and so forth. Another question that arose was whether or not this would only apply to law enforcement officers, or should it be expanded to include others like school resource officers. Whether or not it should be, specific issues over terminology of unwarranted versus unauthorized statements of leniency or of enhanced penalties, and there's some sort of consistency between those terms. Potentially adding the Vermont Criminal Justice Council with a charge to develop a model policy for these types of interrogations. Whether or not this should raise the age, if it should stay at 18, if it should be at 19 or go to 20, or just track once the law goes into effect. Delaying the effective date, expanding beyond custodial interrogations, and then circling back to psychologically manipulative tactics, what those should be, if it should be struck, so on and so forth.
In terms of, I think I was the one that raised initially tracking raise the age, and I'm concerned that this just doesn't cover everyone, and that we're not outright banning deceptive tactics. I don't even know if it should be only for juveniles. So I just want to add that as a point into the discussion. And I mean, I can certainly talk about why, but.
And that was the ACLU's position.
That was the ACLU's position as well, but the more I've heard about the potential impact on people with disabilities, adults with disabilities, I mean, even our Innocence Project person who testified about his wrongful conviction would not be covered by this bill. He was 20 years old when his deceptive interrogation led to a wrongful conviction. So I've got pretty significant concern that this just isn't a blanket. And similarly, as we're talking about rebuilding trust and accountability and building community policing, it seems like it should be a reasonable expectation from the public that the police will not lie to them.
That's reasonable. And I think Julio's testimony, Julio didn't specifically testify to adults, but he did testify to the professional standards and how out of step law enforcement were. So if we allow it to remain with adults, we're still in contravention of Julio's testimony to a certain extent.
Well, and from what I understood from his testimony with the International Association of Police Training and many other places in the world that have already begun this practice outright.
Well, and one possibility might be that we balance, if we do wind up not moving forward with the psychological manipulation, we balance that by expanding the because I think there's a real consensus around the deception. If we expand that out to adults, we're moving both to strengthen and to weaken the bill.
I was going to suggest something similar. I mean, I have my own concerns about the psychologically manipulative section, but like you said, it does seem like we're in consensus about deception in general. And I think broadening it out would make sense for that balancing act. And a quick question regarding deception, and we were talking about changing the knowing mens rea piece of that. And the next step would, if we were to go higher up, would that be the purposeful communication of false acts?
It could be purposeful, it could be intentional. There's some academic debate over really what the difference is between those two terms. But I do know, I believe in the Department of Public Safety's new proposed revisions that they suggested raising it to intentional. And so that is a much more specific mental state. Knowing is basically sort of this conscious idea that you know what you're doing will probably lead to a certain result. Intentional is that what you're doing will lead to a specific result against a specific person.
Yeah.
Intentional
is much harder to prove, right?
It is a higher proof, yes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to the hate crimes statute. And that was always the sticking point, was proving that it was a substantial intent rather than a partial intent, which is what we lowered it to in order to get prosecutors to be able to use the statute. So, I see that the issue. I would think it would really be tough if we put intentional.
I want to go back to the expansiveness that's been suggested, and I'd like to suggest that the evidence in brain science that led us to raise the age and all those other things is the same thing that led us to limit this to juveniles in the beginning anyway, and looking at it as for juveniles, and that asking the Criminal Justice Training Council to develop model policy for all interrogation techniques, and given that they no longer teach the read method and so forth, and that so I think you can do both, so that the model policy covering all, but at least statute sticking with at whatever raise the age level we want to go to. I'm happy, comfortable with that. But if you look at all the evidence, it appears that this is a major issue, and the other states that have done it so far have not gone for whatever reason. And so anyway, that's my suggestion, that we look at those two alternatives, and that we generally agree that psychological manipulation, unless we want to get specific, becomes difficult to define and difficult to enforce. I think there's general agreement. I was particularly impressed by Leo's comments. So I'm just throwing that out there.
2 points that make me just a little uncomfortable is that my understanding is raise the age is currently paused at maybe 19 next year, which doesn't align with the science that says the brain is not really fully developed until 25. We've also heard testimony that adults are not immune to this, or that just gives me pause. And I also understand that while the Vermont State Police has not used READ for 5 years, that individual police agencies are welcome to and have in the very recent past. So I think it's there's a part of me that feels like perhaps we need to more explicitly say that the READ method shall not be used in training, and that people who have been trained in that need to be retrained in a different method, because right now it seems to me that actually people are being trained in READ, just not at the state police level. And anyone prior to 5 years ago was trained in READ, because that sounds like when we move the switch.
I think if I can respond to that, I think there could be an issue with trying to prohibit one specific model of training, because the elements of the READ method. I mean, so I graduated from the academy in 2011. They were teaching that, you know, the first part of it is building rapport and building trust for the person. So, you know, if that's happening, you know, I just feel like, you know, prohibiting one method could cause question as to whether or not certain parts of that method are used, which could be an issue. I mean, like, for example, trying to build rapport and trust with the person at the beginning of an interview. So
I'd like to believe the PACE method also uses that.
probably, but I haven't seen it, so.
So maybe we can flag that as a active area and keep going. Or Senator Sears, would you like to hash these
No,
out?
No, I think we're getting, I just wanted to give an alternative observation on that one. I do have a question about the law enforcement officers and school resource officers. Are school resource officers, I think they should be included, but I don't know if they're not law enforcement officers, not certified law enforcement officers. How do we do that? Can they interrogate kids?
I think just the terminology in here, law enforcement officers in the state of Vermont is enough as far as I can see, because school resource officers are certified through the Vermont Police Academy, Vermont Justice Criminal Academy. So we'd be singling out an individual group of folks who are law enforcement officers, such as the bill says.
So school resource officers are already under law enforcement officers.
Most of them are, I guess, if someone else.
Are there,
Well, those schools that do have SRO,
It's a
I guess, so
retired
many,
officer.
but no, it's not. They're already law enforcement.
okay,
Let's
Well,
not
is he-
single them out here.
is he still certified?
That I
Yeah.
don't know.
I do think to this point, if we want to, I don't know if this expands too much, but I mean, do we also want to talk about, you know, people who work in DCF who have a lot of contact with kids, or, you know, some of the designated mental health agencies who come in contact with kids, or do we want to keep this exclusively to law enforcement?
I would argue for keeping it exclusively with law enforcement. I think we need a whole range of other witnesses if we were to go down that route.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about here is custodial interrogation, moving into a court of law. And I feel like it's a pretty clearly defined set of people who are caught in the net of the bill. So I can see where the investigation might go. It seems like maybe that might be for another piece of legislation.
I will just add here that DCF as state employees are already prohibited from using deceptive tactics by the BS, by their, it's pretty explicitly stated that state employees shall not lie to people, so. But it
Good
does.
to know.
So,
Yeah, and on the point of whether or not school resource officers are certified, that's something that we probably need to do some more research on. I do remember Senator Biofsky explaining that the resource officer in Essex was retired. So what is that, you know, does a retired resource officer retain their certification? That's something that I don't know, but might be worth exploring. Or it could, you know, so this could just be limited to law enforcement officers. You could just say the state, which would be a broader term. Or you could specifically mention school resource officers and maybe work with other DPS or some other partners on working out what that definition would be.
Or even as much, Ben, as on page 1 under line 8 is under, where it says interrogation tactics by certified law enforcement or active certified law enforcement officers. Because when you start getting into the certifications, You can be out for a year and a half, then you have to go back and make up all of your time for that first year, which doesn't count for the second year. And you're a full-time certified officer. I believe it used to be, you could be certified up until, not have powers of arrest, but up until 5 years after the fact from your date of retiring or whatever else, and still have to go back. That's a very, very sticky wicket, which I think active certified law enforcement officers should cover. What we're looking at here, if someone who was a police officer, if he or she is now working into a school, then they're not active, who really don't have interrogation powers under statute as far as being practicing law enforcement officers.
And I think that if somebody is, if they're a school resource officer and they were previously full-time and they still have their certification and they're now hired in the school to perform law enforcement in that school, I think they would ultimately fall under this, right?
Well, yeah, it depends on the breadth of the definition. I mean, so for instance, law enforcement officer is a defined term in other parts of the VSA. So in Title 20, in Section 2351, it's pretty expansive. I mean, Capitol Police, DPS, state police, municipal officer, a constable who exercises law enforcement powers, liquor and lottery agent.
Wait a minute, municipal would cover school districts, right? Because they're municipalities.
So school districts, I think it would depend on the structure of who actually hires the officer. So if it was the district itself, that's why I sort of suggested that referencing the state almost might be cleaner, but it might be broader than what.
I think that definition of law enforcement officer that you read covers what we're talking about. I would, who else would hire a school resource officer besides the district?
The police, sometimes the district contracts directly with the local police,
But
and
then
the
they'd
police
be
does the
covered.
hiring.
Then they're still.
Yeah.
Police employees that contract in.
So they'd be covered
Yes.
either way.
In one of my towns, the school resource officer is a deputy sheriff, hired as through a contract with the sheriff's department, as I understand.
Right, whereas like in one of my towns, it is a former police officer who's retired from police and is hired by the district to provide.
So he's not performing law enforcement duties,
No.
he's performing school resource officer duties.
Does he have the powers of arrest and does he carry a gun? Does he?
This is a change that's happened somewhat.
Ben, could we, we're scheduled to hear former Senator Benning in a few minutes, and I wonder if you could check this out with folks at DOE. If there's any, I think what we're really looking for is, will they come under this without us specifically mentioning school resource officers? Or do school resource officers who are not certified law enforcement officers get involved in any kind of this interrogations and so forth?
Okay, yeah, I'd happily do that.
I think it'd be an easier way to, there may be, 250 different answers for who school resource officer works for.
But I think my concern where this came up for me was in the testimony from the person who was exonerated, who testified that it was the school resource officer who had a relationship that compelled his testimony. And we don't know if that particular school resource officer or any school resource officers are making arrests, but we do know that we have a school to prison pipeline. And we do know that disproportionately impacts marginalized communities. And so I just want to be careful how we thread this needle to make sure that even if someone doesn't have the power to arrest someone, they do have the power to deceive someone with that relationship and that sense of power, and then report that to someone who can arrest them.
No, I think it's important that
we thread this needle.
Sorry, Senator Spears, I didn't hear you.
I said, I think it's important that we get this right in terms of the school resource officer and what position they do hold, because they are, part of their role is to develop trust with the students. there anything else on this for right now? Committees?
I just had a flag for the standard of evidence on the last page, whether it should be clear and convincing or preponderance.
Yep.
I just have a quick question. Are we saying that we are striking or considering striking all of section 5 or fine tuning that? Because subsection D feels more like it's starting to border more on deceptive practice. Sort of providing information that only the person who committed the crime would know.
You said section 5.
It's, oh, I'm sorry, no, it's, so I'm actually talking about page 3, it begins on line 4.
Oh, okay.
Providing those key incriminating facts that only the person who had actually done that crime would know. That feels like it's starting to border on, maybe not deception, but like planting. I don't know, I do want to revisit this, I feel psychologically manipulative piece, because there's definitely spaces where I think there is concern, but that piece to me feels like it is, particularly with people highly impressionable, that it could make them share information that now you can turn around and say, well, you'd only know that if you did it.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to check in as if we were just agreeing to strike all of that, or if we're going to revisit it a little bit more deeply. Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, usually we vote, straw vote on pulling stuff out.
Okay.
So I think Senator Sears right now is just honing in on where the markup questions are.
Correct. Just learning the process for this committee, so thank you for indulging my question.
And Ben is particularly helpful at, if you could give us a copy of where we're at, and we'll also hear from Tucker Jones from the Vermont State Police regarding his suggested changes when we come back to this next week, whenever it gets on the agenda. So with that, we switch over to the bill, trying to S7, enacting the qualifications for a public defender. We have a former state senator from Caledonia County, who, nice to see you again, Joe. Senator
morning.
Benning, welcome back.
Thank you, sir.
I hope you didn't get too wound up with shoveling snow. You looked like you were going to have a day off yesterday.
Our school system was delayed 2 hours, but I'm not really sure why. I don't think we had more than 2.5, 3 inches.
Oh, we got about 9 down here in Bennington.
That's
They
what
called off school. They called off school on Sunday due to inclement weather, and I looked outside and it was sunny.
Well, more power to you. You can have all the snow you got and then some, as long as it stays away from anything north of Route 2 is fine by me.
Yeah, you expressed some concerns about S7.
I do have some concerns, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate Judiciary Committee. My name is Joe Benning, for those of you that don't know me, but I think you all do. I'm a former state senator from the Caledonia District, and I served on the Judiciary Committee for about 8 years, maybe 10 years. I am here to testify on S7 because when I read it, I realized that I had something fairly strong to say about it as a result of being on the Defender General's conflict contractor list. And I have been working in that system for almost 40 years now. I became concerned about the bill, 2 counts really. I understand the logic and the desire to want to make sure all people charged with crimes are given appropriate counsel, but there is a point where resources become very problematic. When I began my senatorial career, I had a secretary and I had a law clerk. By the time I was finished with my senatorial career, I was down to a one-man operation, which is where I am today. As a result of COVID-19, what normally would be about 30 cases in my filing cabinet that were under contract with the Defender General system, I am presently up to around 150 cases, and we are backlogged to the point where next February 8th, I will be drawing juries on cases from 2019. While I respect the intent of the authors of the bill, I'm here to testify that from the practical standpoint of those of us who will be on the point of trying to implement this, we are vastly under resources and we have no ability to meet what you are presently proposing. And I'd like to go back to the days when Jim Douglas was still governor. I'm aware that Matt Valerio came to testify before you and basically what he said, but I predate Matt Valerio in this system. At the time that Jim Douglas was governor, he recognized that there were limited resources that he could assist the Defender General system with. So he came and he asked, what can I do to help you if it doesn't involve increasing money? And the immediate reaction was to try to decrease the number of cases that we would be responsible for holding on to. My recollection is the vast majority of cases at that time were DLS cases, otherwise known as driving with license suspended. Those were eliminated from our caseload and it helped tremendously. Since then, there have been other things that have been done as well to assist, but the bottom line is this bill right now, I am afraid, is going to impact us in a horrible way. And I believe
Sorry, we have a question, Senator Bohofsky.
Yeah, Senator Benning, what are the vast majority of the cases on your caseloads now consisting of? I hear that previously it was DLSs. What is it now?
They range the gamut from sexual assault on a minor. I don't have any present murder cases, but they run from a potential life sentence in sexual assault cases. The case that I'm going to be drawing shortly is involving somebody with a mandatory 10-year minimum if he is convicted. So the seriousness of these charges are quite concerning and they take up a lot of your time.
So your testimony is that the vast majority of your cases are sexual assaults and murders?
No, I'm saying the most serious case that I have right now.
Okay, my question was, what is the majority of your caseload comprised of?
I understand that, Senator, and the majority of my cases right now are in the assault cases, domestic assault, simple assault. We have a number of sexual assault cases, and drugs are primarily the driving factor behind most of the cases that I have. So not only do I have those assault cases, but I also have a substantial number of possession of heroin, possession of fentanyl, et cetera, now pending. There is a recent trend to have first offender DUI cases come back into our caseload. For the longest time, we did not have those cases. And I'm not sure what the trend is that has now been started, but it's very disconcerting because it's adding cases that normally go to a fine-only situation. And for some reason or other, courts are starting to assign those cases to me, and that's very troubling.
Thank you.
So please continue. Senator Baruth had a question.
Senator Benning, good to see you.
True, Philip.
I think your testimony lines up, if I remember right, with Matt Valerio's. In other words, you're recognizing the principle behind it, but saying practically, from a resource standpoint, at this point post-pandemic, you strongly recommend that we don't go down this road. If I remember right, Matt had a similar thing where he was, as Defender General, he was agreeing that it might be in an ideal world the best solution, but right now he had a hard time seeing that he would be able to resource what this bill would direct him to resource. So any further thoughts along those lines?
Well, that's a good synthesis of what the feeling is throughout the defense bar at the moment. I believe he also said to you that there is a lack of defense attorneys available right now. Nobody is really interested in taking on these assigned cases. And in the event that you are adding a substantial portion of cases, and make no mistake, I really hope that you have somebody from the court system come in to testify about what the number of pending cases are that would now fall into this new category of when you strike serious from the phrase serious crime, there is a substantial number of cases out there, and I hope that you take some testimony on that. The problem, Senator Baruth, is that when you end up adding that unknown number of cases right now, which I believe to be quite substantial, you are not going along with also sending a fat paycheck along with that for those of us who are stuck in the situation right now, having to take those cases by contract, but don't have the fiscal resources or the staff resources necessary to assist those clients. And what that does is it translates throughout the entire caseload that I have, that I am no longer able to provide as much attention to the cases that are much more serious, and it becomes very problematic. Well, I hope that if you're pursuing this, you have an accurate picture of just how many cases are going to be added to the list. I am not unsympathetic with what the intent is behind the bill, but I am very much concerned that without the adequate resources that come along with the intent, you are going to cause a much bigger problem on the system than most folks recognize. And it is somewhat, it's repeating itself when we go into status conferences, when I hear not just the defense counsel, but I'm sure that Senator Campbell has talked to you about prosecutors who are also in a situation of showing up to court quite frequently lately saying, we just haven't had time to do X, Y, or Z. That's causing a backlog in the system that's really nobody's fault other than the crushing weight of numbers. So I hope you take what I say here very seriously. I'm very much concerned that if the bill comes through the way it is, I do not have the ability to hire staff. I'm going to end up with a whole lot more cases on my caseload, and that's going to take attention away from the caseload I already have that is quite crushing.
So to summarize, and I think you've been clear, Senator,
Senator Sears, we have Mr. Campbell in the room who is wondering if he could chime in as well.
Let me just finish my question to Joe. Joe, when you talk about resources, I want to make clear, you're not just talking about money. And we could do a fiscal note and argue back and forth if the $1 million or whatever it might cost would be sufficient to cover these new cases. You're talking about the lack of attorneys to actually do it, just like we can't get appraisers to reappraise property in towns that have fallen below the common level of appraisal because there aren't enough of them around. You're talking about both types of resources.
Yeah, you could come up with a sum of money that is sent my way, for instance, but I don't have any attorneys around here that I could hire to take on this new caseload. And even if you're giving me more money, I don't have the ability to handle the caseload. So I'm very much concerned that that has a corresponding impact on the court system. I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. I think it's important to keep in mind when we're not just talking about financial resources. Go ahead, Mr. Vice Chair. Please.
Mr. Campbell wanted to chime in.
Hi, John Campbell.
Yeah.
for state's attorneys and sheriffs. It's unfortunate, but what Joe has said is absolutely true. And again, as Senator Sears pointed out, it's not so much the money aspect as it is finding the attorneys to do it. And the bad part about that is the persons who are really going to suffer are the defendants in these cases, and not just the cases that you're trying to expand to, but the cases that he's got now that they have. Because if they're not able to really pay attention, to really give them proper and the utmost, give a complete defense and working on these cases, they're just not getting what they deserve as far as representation. So, and it's just a human resource issue. We're trying to recruit all throughout the country, just trying to get people here. It's almost impossible.
So maybe, but you do control the spigot at the state's attorney's level. You don't have to bring charges. You could divert them or do something else, right?
That's right. And I think most of the ones you see down here are diverted. There is some alternative justice programs available there.
Senator Bohowski asked a question.
I don't have a question so much. I hear the need for decreasing cases, and Senator Sears, I appreciate your point that we can control the spigot to some extent. I also think this warrants a conversation about what kinds of things we're criminalizing. Like, there are multiple different avenues towards decreasing caseloads, and barring someone from what I would argue is their constitutional right to an attorney is not what I would think is the best way to do that. I think we can instead look at ways of continuing to decrease caseloads, whether that is through what we're charging, alternative justice, and I think we're having a lot of these conversations in this committee.
Senator Sears, if I could just make a comment. The state's attorney does, in fact, control the spigot, but if I read this bill correctly, anybody who is initially charged is automatically entitled to have counsel. While a charge is brought and the state's attorney may subsequently decide this is a good case for diversion, if I read the bill correctly, and Ben can correct me if I'm wrong, this automatically entitles someone to representation, where conceivably a person who might otherwise be destined to diversion could have a conversation with a defense attorney prior to deciding if that's the route they want to go. And I don't know if I'm misreading that, but when I first read it, that was the clear indication I had from it. And by the way, I would heartily encourage a conversation about examining what people are actually charged with. I've been a proponent for that a long time before I was sitting in Senator Bohowski's chair.
Okay. Ben, is that correct?
Yeah, Senator Benning is reading the bill correctly.
Dick, anything else you want to do on this bill?
Well, I would, in closing, like to say a special shout out to Peggy in the corner. It looks like Peter Hirschfeld's sitting in the other corner. It's great to see you guys. And Senator Sears, did you hear that they're moving the title game to Dallas?
Yeah.
Just
Super Bowl, I heard that, yeah.
Yeah, just so the people in Dallas could get the chance to see a championship team.
I saw that, yeah.
With that, it's nice to see you all again.
Good to see you, Joe. And be well.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate you bearing with me, and I'll see most of you this afternoon, or some of you this afternoon, and hopefully all of you tomorrow.